The moment the refugee fleet got tangled up in an alien ambush, Captain Thorne realized he was in for a particularly unpleasant day. Space was no place for a holiday, but today it felt like the universe's cosmic joke was running on overdrive, and he was the punchline. "Captain, the dreadnought's coming apart like a cheap suit in a rainstorm," shouted Hobbs, his perpetually anxious second-in-command, from the other side of the bridge. Thorne ran a hand through his unkempt hair, which he liked to think gave him a rugged, adventurous look. More likely, it made him look like he was losing a battle with a hairbrush. "Hobbs, you ever think maybe the universe is just one big cosmic middle finger?" Hobbs snorted. "Seems like it. I didn't sign up for a galactic version of a bad stand-up routine." The ship shuddered violently, as if trying to shake off the alien attackers like a dog with fleas. Thorne gripped the arm of his chair, pretending he wasn't mildly terrified. "Status on the fleet, Jenkins." Jenkins, a veteran of more battles than he could count, glanced at his screen. "Well, if we're playing who's got worse luck, we're winning. The rest of the fleet's being picked apart like a Thanksgiving turkey." "Fantastic," Thorne muttered, scanning the chaos outside his viewport. Alien ships flitted around like mosquitoes, pesky and seemingly immune to any swats they aimed at them. "You'd think they'd have better things to do than ruin our day." A voice crackled over the comms, as static-laden as an old Earth radio tuned to a non-existent channel. "Captain Thorne, this is Admiral Voss. We're encountering some anomalies." "Anomalies?" Thorne echoed, tapping his comms link. "Admiral, unless your anomalies include a sudden outbreak of good luck, I'm not sure I want to know." "Emotional anomalies," Voss clarified, sounding like he was chewing on nails. "Crew members are reporting strange feelings." "Strange feelings?" Thorne barked a laugh. "Hell, if I got worked up over strange feelings, I'd still be in therapy." "It's like they're trying to stimulate our emotions," Voss continued, ignoring Thorne's sardonic remark. "To what end, I haven't a clue. Just keep your wits about you, Captain." Thorne leaned back, the weight of his station pressing down like a lead blanket. "All right, people, you heard the Admiral. Keep your emotions in check. Don't let these aliens mess with your heads more than they already have." Hobbs grinned, though it was more of a grimace. "Too late for that. I was emotionally compromised the moment I signed up for this gig." "Aren't we all?" Thorne agreed, watching the flickering lights of the control panels, as erratic as his crew's morale. Outside, the alien ships continued their grim dance, a swirling mass of chaos and menace. Thorne's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why simulate emotions? What did these aliens hope to achieve? "Captain," Jenkins piped up again, looking unusually perturbed. "I'm getting reports from the lower decks. People are laughing." "Laughing?" Thorne turned in his chair, frowning. "In the middle of this mess?" "Yes, sir, uncontrollably, like something's tickling their funny bone at the worst possible time." Thorne groaned. "If this is the universe's idea of a joke, I've got a few words for whoever's writing the script." Hobbs shook his head. "Maybe they're just trying to lighten the mood." "Hobbs, if I wanted someone to lighten the mood, I'd hire a clown." "Actually, scratch that. I hate clowns." Jenkins leaned over, his voice low and conspiratorial. "What if they're trying to manipulate us? Use our own emotions against us?" Thorne rubbed his chin. "A devious tactic, but effective if we're all too busy laughing to fight back." Hobbs nodded. "Maybe they're just big fans of dark comedy." "Yeah, well, I'm not laughing," Thorne replied, adjusting his seat as the ship shuddered once more. "We need to figure out how to counter this." The bridge was a cacophony of noise, alarms blaring, lights flickering, crew shouting back and forth like a dysfunctional family at Thanksgiving dinner. Thorne took a deep breath, centering himself. "Suggestions, people?" Jenkins scratched his head. "We could try jamming their signals. Might disrupt whatever they're using to mess with our heads." "Worth a shot," Thorne agreed. "Hobbs, get on it." As Hobbs dashed off to implement the plan, Thorne glanced around at his crew. "All right, listen up. I know these aliens are playing dirty pool, but we're not going to let them get the best of us. We've been through worse and we've come out on top, or, at the very least, in one piece." "Speak for yourself," Jenkins muttered. "I left a piece of me back on Tarsus Roman 4. Yeah, well, that was only a finger," Hobbs added, already tweaking the comms console. "Not like you were using it for much anyway. Try scratching your ass without it," Jenkins retorted. Thorne chuckled despite himself. "All right, enough. Let's show these aliens what we're made of. Start jamming those signals and prepare to fight back." As the crew jumped into action, Thorne felt a flicker of pride. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his ragtag bunch. A crew of misfits who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer and still managed to crack a joke every now and then. But as he watched the alien ships pressing in, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling at the back of his mind. This was more than just a simple battle. Something deeper was at play, something insidious, and whatever it was laughing at them. "Captain," Hobbs called, interrupting his thoughts. "Jamming's in place. Let's see if it works." Thorne nodded. "Do it. And if it doesn't work, make sure our last words are suitably sarcastic." The ship shuddered again, but this time the laughter from the lower decks began to die down, replaced by confused murmurs. "Captain, it's working," Jenkins exclaimed. "The emotional anomalies are fading." Thorne allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Now let's focus on not getting blown to bits." The bridge was a hub of frenetic energy, but the crew worked with a sense of unity that only came from facing certain doom together. Each command barked, each button pressed, brought them one step closer to survival. "Incoming transmission," Hobbs said, his voice tinged with surprise. "From the aliens?" Thorne asked, skeptical. "No, it's Admiral Voss again." "Patch him through," Thorne ordered. Voss's voice crackled over the comms, more static than substance. "Captain Thorne, good work on neutralizing the emotional interference." There was a pause, as if Voss was considering his next words carefully, like a man about to step on a tightrope. "We've received some intel. It appears the aliens are experimenting, testing new methods of warfare." Thorne snorted. "Great to know we're the guinea pigs." "Indeed," Voss replied, his voice dry as a Martian desert. "Continue to hold them off. Reinforcements are on the way." "Reinforcements?" Thorne echoed. "I'll believe it when I see it. Last time we got reinforcements, it was 2 rust buckets held together with duct tape. This time it's the real deal," Voss assured, though Thorne could practically hear the Admiral's fingers crossed over the comms. "I'll keep the champagne on ice then," Thorne replied, cutting the transmission with a flick of his wrist. The battle outside raged on, but the crew's spirits were lifting, bolstered by their small victory. The aliens, it seemed, were not invincible, just a little weird with a penchant for emotional manipulation. "Captain," Jenkins called out, pointing to his screen. "They're regrouping." Thorne nodded, eyes narrowing at the display. "Let 'em come. We've got a few tricks up our sleeves, too." "Like what?" "I dunno," Thorne admitted, a grin spreading across his face. "But we'll figure something out. We always do." The dreadnought shuddered again, but this time Thorne felt a strange sense of hope. Not the kind that came from expecting reinforcements, but the kind that came from knowing his crew would fight tooth and nail, sarcasm and all, until the bitter end. And that, he thought, might just be enough. As the alien ships surged forward once more, the bridge erupted into a flurry of activity. Orders were shouted, weapons were armed, and jokes were cracked. It was like any other day except for the existential dread and the overwhelming odds. "Jenkins, status on those reinforcements." "Still waiting for the cavalry to arrive, sir. They must have taken a wrong turn at Albuquerque." "Figures," Thorne muttered, gripping the armrests of his chair as the ship rocked under fire. The bridge was filled with the din of battle, a symphony of chaos that threatened to drown out any semblance of order. But through it all, Thorne couldn't help but feel a sense of defiance. "All right, people," he shouted, cutting through the noise. "Let's show these aliens why you don't mess with a bunch of humans who have nothing left to lose." Cheers erupted from the crew, a ragged chorus of bravado tinged with desperation. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the battle raged on, Thorne took a moment to reflect. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running on fumes. but they were also stubborn, resourceful, and just crazy enough to think they might survive. "Captain," Hobbs called out, a note of urgency in his voice. "Looks like the aliens are trying something new." Thorn turned his attention to the view screen, where the alien ships were shifting formation, a dance of death and strategy. "Well, whatever it is, we won't let them have the last laugh." With a grim determination, the crew of the dreadnought prepared to face whatever fresh hell the aliens had in store. Jokes might not save them, but they sure as hell made the dying easier. The battle for survival continued, but as the crew fought on, one thing was certain. When the universe laughed in their faces, they laughed right back. The dreadnought lurched forward, another burst of alien fire rattling its weary hull like a giant's fist. Captain Thorn felt the shiver down to her bones, each jolt a reminder that their ship was one good sneeze away from becoming space dust. But before she could savor the impending doom, the ship's comm system crackled with the familiar nasal whine of Rigel, their engineer extraordinaire, or as Thorn fondly dubbed him, the grease monkey with a doctorate. "Captain," Rigel's voice chirped from the intercom, "I've got good news and bad news." "Hit me with the bad news first." "I like to savor disappointment like fine wine," Thorn replied, trying to ignore the flickering lights that suggested their electrical system was on life support. "Bad news is the engine's running hot enough to roast a turkey. If we push it any harder, we'll be flying a giant toaster. And the good news, the coffee machine's still operational." "Small miracles," Thorn muttered, shaking her head. "Keep us flying, Rigel." "We don't have the luxury of giving up just yet." "Understood, Captain. Though if you hear a loud bang followed by silence, well, assume the worst." "Comforting as always," Thorn said, ending the call. She glanced at Hobbs, who was furiously tapping away at his console like a man possessed. "Hobbs, any progress on keeping us from becoming cosmic confetti?" "Trying my best, Captain. But these aliens are relentless. It's like fighting off a swarm of space mosquitoes, each one more annoying than the last." Thorn smirked. "Just don't let them suck us dry." Across the bridge, Zephyra, their intuitive navigator, shot Thorn a wry look. "Captain, if you're planning on steering us through this mess, now would be a good time." "Suggestions, Zephyra. Or should I just close my eyes and pray to whatever gods haven't written us off yet?" Zephyra's fingers danced over her console, her eyes narrowed with concentration. "There's a gap in their formation, but it's tighter than a miser's purse strings. We slip through and we might come out the other side in one piece." "Maybe." "Sounds like a plan," Thorn agreed, her grin more wolfish than hopeful. "Let's crash their party." The dreadnought veered sharply, thrusters straining like the last gasp of an asthmatic. The alien ships, seemingly caught off guard by the abrupt maneuver, hesitated, a momentary lapse that Thorn intended to exploit. "Jenkins, give me something to shoot at," Thorn barked, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. "Target's locked, Captain." "Just say the word." "Fire." The ship's cannons erupted, spewing fiery death into the void. The display on the view screen flickered with flashes of light as alien vessels buckled under the assault, their craft disintegrating into a million glittering shards, like confetti at a child's birthday party, only deadlier. "Nice shooting," Hobbs quipped, his voice strained but grateful. "Don't get cocky," Thorn warned, though a flicker of pride warmed her chest. "It's not over yet." As she spoke, the alien fleet regrouped, their response calculated and swift. Thorn could almost admire their tenacity if it weren't so damned inconvenient. "Captain," Rigel's voice crackled through the comm again, laced with an edge of desperation. "We've got a problem." "The engines are about to blow sky high," Thorn guessed, a bead of sweat tracing a cool line down her temple. "Pretty much. Patch it up, or we're all about to become fond memories." "I'll do my best, but we're running out of duct tape and prayers." "Then improvise," Thorn snapped, cutting the line with a decisive flick. She turned her attention back to the bridge, where the crew's morale teetered on the knife edge of panic and grim determination. Zephyra's sharp intake of breath was like an alarm bell. "Captain, the aliens, they're shifting tactics again." "Of course they are," Thorn muttered, rubbing her temples. Why can't they ever just sit still and lose gracefully? They're targeting the refugee ships, Zephyra continued, her voice tight with urgency. If we don't intervene, they'll be sitting ducks, Thorn finished, her heart sinking. Damn it. Jenkins looked up from his console, his expression unreadable. We can't protect them all, Captain. No, Thorn admitted, the admission sigh in her mouth. But I'll be damned if we don't try. Hobbs, get me a line to the fleet leaders. Let's see if they have any bright ideas, or just enough firepower to stave off an alien massacre. Hobbs nodded, his fingers blurring over the keys. Connecting you now, Captain. The comm crackled to life, sputtering with static before a harried voice emerged, worn and frazzled. This is Commander Lind of the Sundered Star. Captain Thorn, what the hell is going on out there? Short answer. We're up to our necks in it. Thorn leaned forward, her gaze steely. We're facing an alien fleet with a knack for emotional manipulation and a twisted sense of humor. They're targeting the refugees. We're barely holding it together ourselves, Lind replied, his voice tinged with a new level of desperation. If they hit us too hard, we'll all be cosmic dust, Thorn finished. But if we can coordinate our defenses, we might stand a chance. Form up on our six and prepare to put up one hell of a fight. Understood, Captain. We'll do whatever it takes. Good man, Thorn said, cutting the transmission. She turned back to her crew, who watched her with a mixture of hope and dread. All right, people, we've been through hell and back and we're still kicking. Let's send these aliens back to whatever hole they crawled out of. The bridge erupted with renewed energy, the crew's efforts synchronized in the face of overwhelming odds. Thorn's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a drum of defiance against the looming shadow of defeat. As the dreadnought barreled toward the fray, Thorn felt a grim satisfaction settle like a stone in her gut. They might not win, but they'd sure as hell make it a fight to remember. The alien formation tightened, their ships weaving in a deadly ballet that promised destruction. But the humans, stubborn as always, refused to yield. Captain, Zephyra called, her voice steady despite the chaos. They're closing in. Let them come, Thorn replied, her voice a low growl. We're not backing down. The dreadnought surged forward, its engines straining but holding, a testament to Rigel's engineering wizardry or sheer luck. The alien ships loomed closer, their shimmering hulls reflecting the cold light of distant stars. Jenkins, fire at will, Thorn ordered, her gaze fixed on the viewscreen. Let's give them a taste of human hospitality. The cannons roared to life, each shot a beacon of defiance against the encroaching dark. Alien ships exploded in bursts of color, the void alight with the remnants of their failed assault. Cheers erupted from the crew, a ragged symphony of triumph and relief, but Thorn knew better than to celebrate just yet. Stay sharp, people, she cautioned, her eyes scanning the tactical display. This isn't over until we're the only ones left standing. The alien fleet, rattled but not broken, regrouped for another assault. Thorn's mind raced, weighing options and probabilities with the chilly precision of a computer. Captain, Hobbs called, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Incoming message from Admiral Voss. Thorn's lip curled in an involuntary snarl. Patch it through. Voss's voice crackled over the comm, each word clipped and precise. Captain Thorn, we've received intelligence suggesting the aliens are probing for weaknesses. They may attempt another emotional attack. Great, Thorn replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Because the first one was such a smashing success. Remain vigilant, Voss continued, oblivious to Thorn's tone. We're coordinating reinforcements, but they may take some time to reach you. Time's not a luxury we have, Admiral, Thorn replied, cutting the transmission without waiting for a response. She turned to Hobbs. Get creative. If these aliens want to mess with our heads, let's show them what happens when you poke a hornet's nest. Hobbs nodded, a wicked grin splitting his face. I've got a few ideas, Captain. Good, make them count. As Hobbs set to work, Thorn felt the weight of her command settle once more on her shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was their resolve. The aliens pressed their attack, their ships a relentless wave of destruction. Thorn watched the tactical display, her mind a whirl of calculations and instinct. "Zephyra," she called, her voice firm, "plot us a course through their formation. Let's hit him where it hurts." Zephyra's fingers flew over her console, her eyes alight with determination. "Course plotted, Captain. It's a tight squeeze, but we can make it." "Then let's not keep our guests waiting." The dreadnought surged forward, its engines roaring with the fury of a caged beast finally unleashed. The alien ships loomed closer, their formations shifting in a desperate attempt to close the gap. "Jenkins," Thorn barked, her voice a steel edge. "Fire at will. Let's show these aliens what it means to tangle with humanity." The cannons thundered, each shot a defiant roar against the darkness. Alien ships exploded in fiery blossoms, their destruction a testament to the human spirit. But even as they fought, Thorn knew the battle was far from won. The aliens were relentless, their tactics shifting with each encounter. "Captain," Hobbs called, his voice a thin thread of hope. "I've managed to disrupt their communications. They won't be able to coordinate for a while." "Good work," Thorn replied, a fierce grin breaking through. "Let's use that to our advantage." The dreadnought wove through the enemy formation, its guns blazing with relentless fury. The alien ships, deprived of their cohesion, faltered in their assault. "Zephyra, take us through the gap," Thorn ordered, her voice a steady hand on the tiller of chaos. The ship surged forward, its path a blur of speed and precision. The alien ships loomed closer, their weapons promising obliteration. But the dreadnought danced through the storm, its crew a symphony of defiance and skill. Each maneuver, each shot, was a testament to their will to survive. As the alien fleet crumbled under their assault, Thorn felt a surge of triumph. They hadn't won yet, but the tide was turning. "Keep it up, people," she shouted, her voice a rallying cry. "We've got them on the ropes." The crew responded with a roar of determination, their efforts redoubling in the face of victory. But even as they fought, Thorn couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The aliens might be beaten, but they weren't broken. And as long as they had breath, as long as they had fight, the dreadnought and her crew would stand defiant. "Captain," Zephyra called, her voice a lifeline in the storm. "We're breaking through." "Good," Thorn replied, her grin a feral slash. "Let's finish this." The dreadnought surged forward, its guns blazing, its crew a force of nature. The alien ships fell away, their assault broken by the fury of human determination. And as the last enemy ship crumbled into the void, Thorn allowed herself a moment of triumph. They'd survived. But more than that, they'd won. For now. But as the echoes of battle faded, Thorn knew the fight was far from over. The aliens might have been beaten, but they weren't gone. And as long as they threatened humanity, as long as they dared to challenge the indomitable spirit of the human race, Thorn and her crew would stand ready. Because when the universe laughed in their faces, they'd laugh right back. And one way or another, they'd have the last laugh. The dreadnought's bridge was a hive of activity, every corner buzzing with the frenetic energy of a crew pushed to their limits. Captain Thorn stood at the center, a conductor of chaos with a baton made of iron will and sheer audacity. "All right, folks," she announced, voice carrying over the din, "it's time to get creative. We've got aliens in the house and they brought their emotional baggage. Let's send them home crying to mama." Hobbs, hunched over his console like a vulture over roadkill, snorted. "You mean we're gonna out-crazy the crazes, Captain?" "Exactly, Hobbs," Thorn replied with a smirk. "Human ingenuity and unpredictability, our two greatest, probably only, assets." Rigel, the ship's grease monkey with a doctorate, piped up, his hands already deep in another console's guts. "I've rerouted the coolant from the mess hall to help with the engine overheating. We might not have iced drinks for a while, but we won't explode in a fiery ball of death, so win some, lose some." "Priorities," Jenkins grumbled, his grizzled face twisting into a wry smile. "Better warm beer than no beer." Zephyra, the navigator with a sixth sense for trouble, peered at the tactical display. "These aliens are like a bad relationship, Captain. Just when you think you've got them figured out, they show you a whole new level of crazy." "Sounds like my ex," Hobbs muttered, earning a chuckle from the crew. Thorn tapped her chin, surveying the chaos. Here's the plan. Hobbs, I want you to jam their signals again, but throw in some human classics. Give them Beethoven, some Queen, and maybe a little Spice Girls for good measure. Let's see how they handle a cultural assault. That's evil, Rigel laughed. I love it. Desperate times, desperate measures, Thorn replied. Jenkins, you and I will coordinate a series of random attacks. Keep them guessing. They want to mess with our emotions. Let's show them how unpredictable humans can be. Jenkins nodded, a dangerous glint in his eye. Consider it done, Captain. Just as everyone settled into their roles, the ship lurched violently. A wave of nausea swept through the bridge, leaving the crew reeling. It felt like their collective worst hangovers had just punched them in the gut. That's new, Rigel groaned, clutching the console for support. Looks like our friends are stepping up their game, Thorn said, her voice steady despite the dizziness. Zephyra, any bright ideas on what the hell just happened? Emotional simulation, Zephyra replied, her voice tinged with frustration. They're amplifying our worst fears and memories. It's like they're playing our brains like a cheap violin. Well, they are in for a surprise, Thorn said, forcing a grin. My brain was never very musical. Hobbs glanced up, face pale but determined. I've got the music ready, Captain. Let's hit them with a symphony of chaos. Do it, Thorn ordered. And remember, people, they can't simulate what they can't understand. Let's remind them that humans have been dealing with chaos since we figured out fire was hot. As the music blasted out across the void, the alien ship staggered, their formation splintering as they reeled from the unexpected sonic assault. For a moment, it looked like the plan was working. Then the alien counterattack hit, harder than ever, ramping up the emotional simulations to a mind-bending intensity. Nightmares sprung to life in vivid detail, clawing at the edges of the crew's consciousness. Captain, Rigel shouted, voice strained as he struggled to keep the engines from tearing themselves apart. They're hitting us with everything they've got. That's all right, Thorn replied, teeth gritted against the onslaught. We've been through worse. Remember that time in the Uit cloud, when we were stuck for 3 days with nothing but space plague radio? How could I forget? Jenkins said with a pained chuckle. I still can't hear Galactic Love Ballad without breaking into hives. But we survived, Thorn pressed, her voice a lifeline in the madness. And we'll survive this too. A deep breath, a centering of wills. The crew rallied, their resolve stiffened by shared grit and gallows humor. They'd faced death before. This was just another round of the universe's worst game of charades. Hobbs' status on the fleet, Thorn barked, shaking off the specters of her past. They're holding, he said, his eyes glued to his screen. Barely, but Admiral Voss is sending reinforcements. They might just arrive before we're space dust. Well, isn't that comforting? Zephyra quipped, her fingers never pausing in their dance across her console. Always nice to know our inevitable doom is running a little late. Focus, people, Thorn commanded, her eyes sharp with determination. We've got a job to do. Jenkins, keep those aliens off balance. Rigel, keep us flying. Hobbs, crank up the volume. Already on it, Hobbs replied, flashing a thumbs up. They're getting the full human experience now, mumble rap included. That's cruel and unusual punishment, Hobbs, Rigel laughed. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost, Thorn said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. But not quite. The dreadnought surged forward, a barely contained wreck held together by duct tape, stubbornness, and Rigel's unyielding will. Its guns blazed, carving chaos through the alien ranks. Each shot was a defiant scream into the void, a reminder that humanity didn't give up easily. Captain, Zephyra called, her voice tight with concentration. I've plotted an evasive course that'll take us through the densest part of their formation. Think of it like threading a needle in a hurricane. Sounds perfect, Thorn replied. Let's dance. The ship swung into action, darting through the enemy lines with reckless grace. It was a suicide mission made possible only by the sheer impossibility of human audacity. Jenkins, Thorn ordered, her voice a whip crack, light them up. With pleasure, Jenkins replied, unleashing a torrent of firepower that cut a swath through the alien fleet. The confusion worked in their favor. The aliens, deprived of their usual cohesion, flailed in disarray. It was chaos on a cosmic level, and the dreadnought was the catalyst. "Captain," Hobbs called, his excitement palpable. "Their simulations are faltering. We're breaking through." "That's what I like to hear," Thorne replied, her eyes alight with grim satisfaction. "Let's keep the pressure on." As the battle raged on, the dreadnought fought like a cornered beast. Its guns blazed, its engines screamed, and its crew held the line with the tenacity of a species that refused to die quietly. But the aliens were not beaten yet. Even as their ships disintegrated in fiery blossoms, they regrouped, their tactics shifting with a precision that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. "Hobbs, keep jamming their signals," Thorne ordered, her voice a steady anchor amidst the chaos. "On it, Captain," he replied, fingers flying over the console. "Rigel," Thorne continued, "how's our power looking?" "Holding," Rigel grunted, his face a mask of concentration. "Barely, but I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." "As long as it takes," Thorne replied, her voice ironclad. The dreadnought plunged deeper into the fray, its path a blur of desperate maneuvers and defiant gunfire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their minds. But they were human, and that counted for something. "Zephyra," Thorne called, her voice a beacon of resolve. "What's our status?" "We're still in one piece," Zephyra replied, her tone laced with disbelief. "For the moment." "Good," Thorne said, her smile a fierce challenge to the universe. "Let's keep it that way." The battle pressed on, each moment a brutal test of will and endurance. The dreadnought danced a fine line between destruction and survival, its crew refusing to yield. "Captain," Hobbs called, a fresh urgency in his voice. "The reinforcements are almost here." "About damn time," Thorne muttered, her relief tempered by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. But for now they had bought themselves a chance, a slim, precarious chance to turn the tide. And that was more than they'd had a few minutes ago. "All right, people," Thorne announced, her voice a rallying cry. "Let's finish this. Show these aliens what it means to mess with humanity." The crew responded with a roar of determination, their spirits buoyed by the promise of reinforcements and the taste of impending victory. As the alien fleet began to splinter, Thorne allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. They were winning, but it wasn't over yet. "Keep it together," she cautioned, her eyes scanning the chaos for any sign of a new threat. This is where it gets tricky. The dreadnought continued its relentless assault, the crew's defiance a bright flame against the encroaching dark. They fought with everything they had, each shot a testament to their refusal to surrender. And as the alien fleet crumbled under their onslaught, Thorne felt a fierce pride in her crew. They'd faced the abyss and spat in its eye. "Let's make sure they never forget us," she said, her voice a fierce challenge to the universe. The dreadnought surged forward, its guns blazing, its crew a force of nature. The aliens had come expecting an easy victory, and instead found a fight they'd never forget. And as long as the dreadnought had breath, as long as its crew had fight, they would stand defiant. Because when the universe laughed at humanity, humanity laughed right back. And one way or another, they'd have the last laugh. The dreadnought was a symphony of chaos, though not the kind of symphony you'd want a front row seat for. More like the kind where each note was a death knell and the conductor was a sadistic alien bent on turning your brain into pudding. But that was life on the dreadnought. You either laughed at the absurdity or cried at the futility, and Captain Thorne had never been much of a crier. "All right, folks," Thorne announced, her voice cutting through the pandemonium like a rusty knife. "Time for a little insanity. We're going to take a jaunt over to the alien mothership. You know, just to say hi." Her crew collectively winced. Zephyra looked like she just swallowed a bug. "You sure that's a good idea, Captain?" she asked, skepticism practically dripping from her words. "Won't they roll out the welcome mat with plasma guns?" "Probably," Thorne replied with a smirk. "But if we're going to go down, might as well do it with style. Besides, they've been kind enough to offer a direct invitation with all this brain-melting nonsense. Time to RSVP. Hobbs shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Well, I always wanted to see the inside of an alien mothership, bucket list and all that. Consider this a field trip, Thorn said, clapping him on the back. And if we don't make it back, at least we'll die as a mildly interesting footnote in whatever passes for their history books. Jenkins leaned over, his expression somewhere between amused and incredulous. You're serious about this, aren't you, Captain? Deadly, Thorn affirmed. Rigel, keep the ship from exploding while we're gone, would you? Rigel, still elbow-deep in machinery, gave a mock salute. I'll keep her in one piece, Captain, but no promises if you bring back any souvenirs. With that settled, Thorn gathered her merry band of lunatics, Hobbs, Jenkins, and Zephyra. They clambered into the shuttle, a rickety contraption that looked like it would struggle to ferry them across a parking lot, let alone a battlefield. Any last words? Hobbs asked, his fingers dancing over the controls with the ease of a gambler cheating at cards. Let's not, Thorn said, strapping herself in. It's bad luck, and I'm not in the mood for heartfelt speeches. The shuttle shook like an ancient washing machine as they launched into the void. The alien fleet loomed ahead, a menacing dance of lights and shadows. It was the kind of view that made you question your life choices up to that point. On a scale of 1 to we're all going to die, how stupid is this? Zephyra asked, her voice steady despite the situation. About an 11, Thorn replied, but we thrive on impossible odds. Think of it as an interstellar icebreaker. They sped forward, dodging enemy fire with all the grace of a drunkard at a ballet. Thorn's focus was razor-sharp, her mind compartmentalizing fear and channeling it into action. If adrenaline was a drug, she was mainlining it. As they approached the mothership, the alien defenses intensified, a blinding onslaught of color and death. Hobbs swore under his breath, his hands a blur across the controls. Mind the fireworks, Jenkins muttered, peering through the viewport. I prefer not to become a cosmic cinder. Noted, Hobbs grunted, guiding the shuttle through the chaos with a skill born of desperation and caffeine. The docking bay loomed ahead, a gaping maw that promised uncertain doom. But for Thorn and her crew, it was the only choice, a mad gamble with everything on the line. As they slipped inside, the silence was oppressive, a stark contrast to the battlefield cacophony they'd left behind. The docking bay was eerily empty, as if the aliens had gone on a coffee break. Looks like we've got the place to ourselves, Thorn said, unbuckling her harness. Let's try and not wear out our welcome. They disembarked, weapons at the ready, eyes scanning the shadows for signs of life. The interior of the mothership was sleek and otherworldly, a labyrinth of gleaming corridors and unnerving quiet. Where to, Captain? Jenkins asked, his tone laced with dry humor. Find the brains of this operation, Thorn replied. If we can get a peek at their playbook, maybe we can stop them from turning us into their emotional piñatas. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the alien architecture. Thorn's instincts were on high alert, every nerve thrumming with the promise of danger. As they turned a corner, they stumbled into a patrol of alien soldiers, half a dozen space nightmares with too many limbs and a penchant for dissection. Well, this got interesting, Hobbs quipped, raising his weapon. Let's give them a warm greeting, Thorn said, opening fire. The corridor erupted into chaos, bullets and plasma slicing through the air. Thorn moved like a woman possessed, her shots precise and lethal. The aliens went down hard, grotesque forms crumpling under the assault. Nice to meet you, too, Jenkins said, stepping over one of the bodies with a grimace. Keep moving, Thorn ordered, her mind already racing ahead. We've got to find the command center before they realize we're here. They pressed on, each turn a gamble, each step an act of defiance. Their luck held, though Thorn knew it wouldn't last forever. The universe had a funny way of evening the score. The command center was a sprawling chamber of holographic displays and alien technology. It hummed with an unsettling vitality, the air charged with an intelligence that was both alien and unnerving. All right, Thorn said, cracking her knuckles. Let's see what makes these bastards tick. Zephyra got to work on the controls, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who'd hacked into more systems than she'd care to admit. Information scrolled across the displays, alien script twisting in ways that made the human eye water. "Anything useful?" Jenkins asked, keeping watch at the door. "Plenty," Zephyra replied, her eyes glued to the screen. "Looks like they're using some kind of neural network to coordinate their attacks. If we can disrupt it, we might buy the fleet some breathing room." "Can you hack it?" Thorn asked, her voice edged with urgency. Zephyra grimaced, a bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple. "I can try, but it'll take time, and they're going to notice." "Then we'd better make it quick," Thorn said, eyes scanning the room for threats. As Zephyra worked, the alien network fought back, countermeasures flaring like angry hornets. The room seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, the kind that promised swift retribution. "Hurry it up," Hobbs urged, glancing nervously at the displays. "I don't think they're sending us a fruit basket." Finally, with a triumphant shout, Zephyra cracked the system, the alien displays flickering in confusion. The neural network fractured, its grip on the alien fleet loosening. "Got it," she said, breathless. "But we've got company." The door burst open, a fresh wave of alien soldiers flooding the room. The odds were stacked, but Thorn and her team didn't hesitate. They met the onslaught with everything they had, a whirlwind of violence in the confined space. The aliens were relentless, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm, but Thorn fought with the desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. "Time to go," Thorn shouted over the din, glancing at the rapidly deteriorating situation. They broke for the exit, fighting every step of the way. The corridors were a blur of motion and gunfire, each turn a desperate sprint towards salvation. "How far, Hobbs?" Thorn yelled, the shuttle still a distant hope. "Just ahead," he replied, voice strained with exertion. They barreled down the final stretch, skidding into the docking bay with seconds to spare. The shuttle was there, beckoning like a lifeline in the storm. "Move," Thorn commanded, ushering her team inside. The shuttle shook violently as Hobbs punched the engines, the alien mothership receding as they shot back into the void. The return to the dreadnought was a chaotic jumble of relief and adrenaline, the ship welcoming them back with the familiarity of old boots. "Well, that was a hell of a joyride," Jenkins said, collapsing into a seat with a groan. "Anyone else feel like they've aged a decade?" Thorn chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Just another day at the office, but we've given the fleet a fighting chance." As the dreadnought continued its defiant stand, Thorn allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. They'd survived against all odds, stealing a sliver of hope from the jaws of chaos. But the war was far from over. The aliens would regroup, the battle would rage on, and the universe was still laughing, which suited Thorn just fine. After all, she still had a few jokes left in her arsenal, and she intended to use them. The dreadnought creaked and groaned like an old sailor with a vendetta against modern medicine. The ship's engine, running hotter than a summer barbecue, rumbled beneath the metal floors as the crew stumbled back aboard. They hadn't so much docked as they had crash-landed, but at this point, semantics weren't worth dying over. "Home sweet combusting home," Hobbs muttered, peeling himself out of his seat with all the enthusiasm of a sloth on sleeping pills. Thorn staggered to her feet, glanced around the bridge, and took stock. The bridge was the usual circus of flashing lights and screeching alarms that had become their symphony of survival. "I swear if I hear one more alarm, I'm going to shoot the damn thing," she growled. "Seconded," Jenkins said, as he pried his fingers from their death grip on the armrest. "I've had enough of living in a perpetual state of everything's on fire." Thorn flicked on the comm, hoping for something resembling good news. Admiral Voss's voice crackled through, and that was about as reassuring as a hangman's smile. "Captain Thorn, what's your status?" he asked, the kind of question where the answer was always bad news. "We're aboard, Admiral. The mothership didn't roll out the red carpet, but we managed to crash their system a bit. They'll be picking up the pieces for a while, good, because it's hell out here. Their emotional simulations are causing chaos. Half the fleet's in disarray. Sounds like a hell of a party, Thorn replied dryly. What's the plan, sir? We can't exactly hang a do not disturb sign on this mess. We need more time. They're pressing hard and the simulations are getting worse. People are losing it. Thorn glanced at her crew. They were a ragtag bunch, each with a face like a slapped arse, but they were hers. She had to keep them together, even if it meant duct taping their sanity back in place. We'll hold, Admiral. Just try not to lose too many ships before we figure out something clever. Do your best, Thorn. Voss out. The comm cut off, leaving a vacuum of silence, the kind that made you question your career choices. Thorn turned to Zephyra. How's the coolant situation? Zephyra was already fiddling with the controls, her expression one of mild disgust. We're fresh out of anything resembling good news. We rerouted everything we could to keep the engine from turning into a very expensive paperweight. Great. So we're running on anger and adrenaline, Jenkins quipped. Why aren't we dead yet? Thorn chuckled without humor. Because we're too stubborn to die, Jenkins. That, or the universe is saving us for some special kind of hell. As if on cue, the comm system buzzed again, this time broadcasting a wave of static that clawed at the edges of sanity. The alien simulations were still in full swing, transmitting emotions that felt like the bastard children of dread and despair. Rigel stumbled onto the bridge, looking like he'd just woken up from a nightmare he hadn't been invited to. What the hell is that noise? It's like someone weaponized a bad breakup. That's their game, Thorn replied. They're trying to break us down from the inside. Make us turn on each other, lose hope, Hobbs snorted. Good luck with that. I've had exes try harder, armory check, Thorn snapped, cutting through their banter. And keep the ship together, Rigel. We're not done making history just yet. Rigel gave her a salute that ended in a rude gesture, and Thorn couldn't help but grin. Gallows humor was their currency, and it spent well in times like these. The bridge was a hive of activity, an organized chaos that was as comforting as it was deadly. Outside, the alien fleet loomed, a wall of death waiting to pounce. The dreadnought shuddered as another wave of psychic assault hit, the emotional backlash sinking its claws into the crew. Hobbs slumped against a console, his face as pale as a lunar wasteland. Is it just me, or does this feel like the worst hangover in the history of bad decisions? We've got to keep it together, Thorn said, her voice firm despite the turmoil. The fleet's counting on us to distract these bastards long enough for someone smarter than us to figure out how to turn the tide. Not sure there's anyone left that fits that bill, Jenkins said, his laugh a dry rasp. Zephyra was still at her post, fingers flying over the controls with the determination of someone who'd been told it was impossible. I'm trying to jury-rig a defense against their mind games, she said. It's like trying to build a wall out of wet tissue, but it's better than nothing. If they want to mess with our heads, they picked the wrong crew, Hobbs said. We're already certified lunatics. Thorn nodded, a grim smile tugging at her lips. Too crazy to die, remember, more like too crazy to know when to quit, Jenkins muttered. Another wave of psychic pressure hit, the emotional barrage a relentless tide. Thorn's mind reeled, not for the first time cursing the aliens for their creativity and cruelty. The simulations tugged at her fears, whispered insecurities she'd long buried under layers of bravado. But she was Captain Thorn, and she'd be damned if she let some oversized space bugs make her question herself. Instead, she did what she always did when the world threatened to drown her. She laughed in its face. All right, you ugly sons of bitches, she said aloud, if you want a fight, you've got one. But you're going to have to try harder than that to get under my skin. The bridge seemed to steady at her words, the crew drawing strength from their captain's defiance. It was a thin veneer, but sometimes that was all it took to hold the line. Let's crank up the music, Hobbs suggested. If their plan is to make us feel something, let's return the favor. Thorn gave him a nod. Do it. I want them to know what real human madness sounds like. Hobbs grinned, a feral edge to his smile, and tapped into the comm system, sending a blast of cacophonous human music out into the void. It was a mix of heavy metal, punk, and whatever else survived the test of time and anger. The alien fleet hesitated, a momentary stumble in their relentless advance. It was a small victory, but one that tasted sweet against the backdrop of chaos. "See," Jenkins said, his voice carrying a note of triumph. "We're not dead yet." "No," Thorn agreed, "but we've got a long way to go before we're out of this mess." As the music blared and the crew steeled themselves for the next wave, Thorn felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders, heavier than ever. Each decision, each moment teetered on the brink of disaster, but she couldn't afford to falter. "Status update," she called out, her voice carrying over the din. Zephyra glanced up from her console. "The aliens are regrouping. We've thrown them off, but it won't last, and the fleet's still holding, but only just. Morale's in the gutter and the simulations are hitting everyone hard." Thorn nodded, her mind a whirlwind of strategies and second guesses. "We need to give them something to believe in. Remind them why we're fighting." "Hope?" Hobbs asked, his tone skeptical. "No," Thorn replied, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "Revenge. Let's make these bastards regret ever thinking they could mess with us." With a plan as patchwork as the ship itself, Thorn and her crew set about readying the dreadnought for another stand. Their resilience was a testament to human stubbornness, a refusal to go quietly into the night. "Ready for round. What are we on now?" 50, Jenkins asked, though the humor was forced. "Feels more like 100, Rigel replied, "but who's counting?" Thorn chuckled, the sound rough in her throat. "Let's give them hell one more time." The alien fleet moved, a dark wave against the stars, and the dreadnought faced them down with all the fury and pride of a species that refused to be broken. For all its flaws, the human spirit was a tenacious beast, and Thorn intended to ride it into oblivion if necessary. As the first shots rang out, a chorus of destruction echoing through the void, she felt a strange sort of peace. Not the peace of resignation, but of acceptance. Whatever happened next, they'd met it on their terms. Grim, relentless, and with a middle finger raised to the cosmos. And in this darkest hour, as the fleet teetered on the brink, Captain Thorn knew that if this was the end, they'd go down fighting. And if not, well, they'd just have to live to piss off the universe another day. The dreadnought's bridge was a whirlwind of frantic activity, with alarms blaring and lights flickering like a low-rent disco. Thorn felt like the universe's worst DJ, spinning chaos instead of records. She shot a glance at Rigel, who appeared to have been hit with one of those eureka moments that usually meant trouble. "Rigel, you look like you've got something to say that doesn't involve us all dying horribly." "Please, enlighten us," Thorn drawled, trying to sound more hopeful than she felt. Rigel, the ship's designated miracle worker and part-time mad scientist, grinned like a cat with a new toy. "I think I've found a chink in the alien's armor," he said, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Oh, thank God," Jenkins muttered. "I was starting to think our only options were surrender or spontaneous combustion." "Explain," Thorn said, crossing her arms and leaning back, trying to give off an air of casual confidence despite the fact that her heart rate was doing its best impression of a drum solo. "It's their simulations," Rigel continued, his hands gesticulating wildly. "They're trying to mess with our emotions, right? But they don't understand human creativity. It's too unpredictable, too weird for them to handle." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "So what? We throw interpretive dance at them and hope they break down crying?" "Not a bad idea," Rigel said with a chuckle. "But I was thinking more along the lines of using art, music, anything that's uniquely human. They can't process it the way we do. It confuses them, right?" Hobbs chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips. "We weaponize art. I always knew those pretentious gallery types would save the world someday." Zephyra gave Rigel a dubious look. "And how exactly do we get them to notice our cultural assault?" "Well, they're already tuned into our comms," Rigel explained. "We just need to blast them with something genuinely baffling." Thorn's mind raced. It was a crazy idea, the kind of plan that was so off the wall it might just work. "Okay, let's give it a shot. We've got nothing to lose except our dignity, and that was gone 3 crises ago." Where do we start? Jenkins asked, looking cautiously optimistic, which for him was downright cheerful. Music's a good place, Ridgel said. Hobbs, you've got a decent library of old Earth tracks, right? Hobbs grinned like a rogue with a winning hand. I've got everything from Gregorian chants to death metal. We can give them the full human experience, mix it up, Thorne instructed. If we're going to confuse them, we need variety. Make it so unpredictable they start questioning their life choices. Jenkins snorted, questioning life choices. I'm an expert at that. Just play the damn music, Thorne ordered, rolling her eyes. And Ridgel, see if you can add some visual chaos into the mix. We've got records of paintings, videos, anything that screams human. On it, Ridgel said, diving into the ship's digital archives like a prospector digging for gold. Thorne turned back to the view screen, where the alien fleet was still looming ominously. Their ships were sleek, deadly, and entirely too silent, the kind of silence that made you feel small and insignificant. All right, you alien bastards, she murmured under her breath. Let's see how you handle a little culture shock. As Hobbs began to cue up the first track, a cacophony of bagpipes and heavy metal, Thorne couldn't help but smile. It was a ridiculous plan, sure, but there was a twisted sort of beauty in it. Humanity at its finest, a species that, when cornered, threw creativity at its problems and hoped for the best. The music hit the comms with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Thorne couldn't hear it, of course, but she could feel it in the way the dreadnought seemed to vibrate with defiance. The crew exchanged bemused looks, and even Jenkins cracked a grin. Think they're dancing yet? Zephyra asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. If they are, it's probably the universal dance of "Oh God, make it stop," Ridgel replied. The alien ships wavered, their formation shifting ever so slightly. It was a small thing, maybe even wishful thinking, but Thorne clung to it like a lifeline. Keep it up, she urged. We're hitting them where it hurts. Their sanity. Hope they like the classics, Hobbs said, tapping into the next track, a medley of operatic singing and techno beats that any self-respecting DJ would call a career-ender. We're either geniuses or complete lunatics, Jenkins said, shaking his head in amusement. Why not both? Thorne replied, her grin sharp as a knife. As the chaos continued, the alien fleet seemed hesitant, their movements uncertain. It was as if they were trying to understand something fundamentally beyond their grasp, like a child trying to solve a calculus problem with crayons. The crew watched, a strange hush falling over them despite the insanity they were broadcasting. Zephyra, any change in their simulations? Thorne asked. Zephyra checked her console, her brows knitting together as she parsed the data. Their emotional broadcasts are fluctuating. It's like they're struggling to maintain their hold. Good, Thorne said, determination hardening her voice. Let's keep the pressure on. Hobbs, ramp it up. With pleasure, Hobbs said, his fingers dancing across the controls. The next track was a symphony of dissonance, punk rock interspersed with random bursts of classical violin. It was enough to make anyone's brain hurt, which was exactly what Thorne was counting on. Think we should throw in some actual dance? Jenkins suggested, only half joking. Why not? Ridgel said, not missing a beat. I'll dig through the archives for anything we can broadcast visually. Thorne watched as her crew embraced the madness with a kind of giddy abandon. It was infectious, this reckless hope, and for the first time since the battle began, she allowed herself to believe they had a chance. Let's show them what it means to be human, she said, the words carrying a weight beyond their simplicity. The alien fleet, once so implacable, now seemed almost confused. Their formations lagged, movements stuttering like a machine trying to run on faulty programming. It was working against all odds, it was actually working. Of course, the universe had a way of reminding you not to get too comfortable. Just as they started to push the aliens back, the dreadnought's engine let out a groan that could only mean trouble. Captain," Ridgel said, his eyes wide with concern as he glanced at the diagnostics. "We've got a problem. The engine's overheating again. We're close to having a meltdown. Perfect timing, as always," Thorne muttered, pinching the bridge of her nose. Zephyra, any more tricks up your sleeve? I'm fresh out of miracles, Zephyra replied, grimacing. But maybe, just maybe, we can reroute more power from non-essential systems to cool it down. It'll be tight. Do it, Thorn ordered. But keep enough juice to continue our cultural offensive. You got it, Zephyra said, her fingers flying over the controls in a blur of efficiency. Outside, the alien fleet seemed to slow further, their lines wavering like mirages. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a reprieve, a moment to catch their breath. How long can we keep this up? Jenkins asked, his voice a low murmur. Thorn shrugged. As long as we have to. We'll fight with every last bit of humanity we've got left, which, judging by our music, isn't much, Hobbs quipped, though there was a warmth in his eyes that belied the sarcasm. Hey, if they wanted a more civilized enemy, they should have picked a different planet, Thorn replied, smirking. The crew laughed, a sound that was half relief, half madness, but entirely genuine. It was a small victory, but in the void of space, small victories were all they had. Keep monitoring the fleet, Thorn said to Zephyra. We need to know if our little stunt is helping them too. Zephyra nodded, her focus unwavering. Their signals are stabilizing. Whatever we're doing, it's keeping their spirits up. Good, Thorn said, allowing herself a moment of pride. Then we keep going. Rigel, see if you can find some of those bizarre art films from the early 21st century. The stranger, the better, on it, Rigel said, grinning like a kid in a candy store. Once I'm done, they won't know what hit them. Let's hope it's enough, Jenkins said, though his voice carried a note of hope that hadn't been there before. And so they continued, broadcasting the collective insanity and brilliance of human culture into the cosmos. The crew worked tirelessly, their efforts a patchwork of desperation and ingenuity. It was a dance on the edge of oblivion, but Thorn wouldn't have it any other way. The alien fleet, once so certain in their psychological warfare, now seemed at a loss. Their attempts to counter the humans' onslaught of emotion and creativity faltered, like a bully suddenly unsure of their power. Looks like they're finally getting a taste of their own medicine, Hobbs said, watching the aliens' disarray with a smirk. About time someone else dealt with an existential crisis for a change, Jenkins added. Let's not get cocky, Thorn warned, though her tone was light. We've still got a long way to go before we can call this a win. The crew nodded, understanding the unspoken command. They were in this together, a motley band of survivors wielding art and music as their weapons of choice. Ready for the next round, Rigel announced, a mischievous glint in his eye. Then let's give it to them, Thorn said, her voice carrying the weight of every human who'd ever fought against impossible odds. With the dreadnought systems holding, the crew continued their assault. Each piece of art, each note of music was a testament to their resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, they had something worth fighting for. And as the alien fleet hesitated, caught in the whirlwind of human creativity, Thorn felt the stirrings of a new kind of hope. Not the naive sort that believed everything would be fine, but the gritty, stubborn hope that refused to quit, no matter the odds. In that moment, Captain Thorn knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. They were more than just a crew, they were a symphony of defiance, a chorus of madness that would echo through the stars long after the battle was done. And if the universe thought it could break them, it was in for a hell of a surprise. The dreadnought's bridge hummed with frenetic energy, alarms still blaring like a symphony of impending doom. Captain Thorn tapped her foot impatiently, eyes flitting between the chaotic mess on the view screen and the organized chaos of her crew scrambling around her. The alien fleet, once a terrifyingly unified force, now looked like it had been designed by a committee arguing over how to paint a snake with legs. All right, people, Thorn barked, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alerts. We've given these aliens a crash course in human insanity. Now let's see if they can graduate. Hobbs, cue the next track, she continued, stealing a glance at the bemused crew member. Hobbs was already on it, fingers dancing over controls like a concert pianist on a bender. The speakers crackled to life, blasting out a discordant blend of yodeling and dubstep that could make a cyborg cry. "Can't wait to see what kind of existential crisis this one inspires," Hobbs quipped, grinning. "Existential crisis." Jenkins chimed in, archiving the moment with a smirk. "I've been having one since breakfast." Thorne retorted, arching a brow. "I think we've been eating anxiety and regret for every meal." The alien ships faltered, their sleek, menacing forms jittering in space like they'd suddenly remembered an appointment elsewhere. Thorne watched with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. It was working. Somehow, by the grace of every god she didn't believe in, it was working. "Rigel?" Thorne called, looking for their miracle worker. "Status, engines are holding for now," Rigel replied, his eyes glued to the diagnostics. "But they are hotter than a sunbather at a supernova. We keep pushing them. We'll end up as a fireball with delusions of grandeur," Zephyra added, her fingers flying over her console as she tried to squeeze every last ounce of efficiency out of the dreadnought's failing systems. "Wonderful." "Exploding on our own terms, always a good fallback," Thorne said dryly. "Zephyra, how's the fleet holding up? Chaos but controlled," Zephyra answered, her voice tight with focus. "Their simulations can't keep pace with the creative assault. It's like trying to paint a sunset with a hammer." "Good," Thorne said, grinning sharply. "Let's keep hammering away." The crew doubled down, their actions a chaotic ballet of desperation and inspiration. It was beautiful in a twisted sort of way, like watching a train wreck where the train had decided to fight back. "Captain, incoming message from Admiral Voss," comms crackled, barely keeping up with the barrage of noise. "Patch it through," Thorne ordered, steeling herself for whatever the Admiral had to say. Probably something about how they were all doomed, but with a sternly disapproving tone. "Thorne," Voss' voice came through, gruff and scratchy from the comm. "What in the name of sanity are you doing out there, giving the aliens a taste of Earth's finest noise pollution?" Thorne replied with a nonchalant shrug, even though she knew Voss couldn't see her. "And it's working better than any weapon we've got." "Well, keep it up." "Our sensors show the alien systems are glitching out left and right. It's like they've caught a virus from hell," Voss growled, a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. "Music to my ears, Admiral," Thorne shot back. "We'll keep the pressure on. Good luck, Thorne." Voss out. As the line went dead, Thorne allowed herself a moment to breathe, the air tasting sweeter somehow. Maybe it was the hint of a future where they weren't all annihilated that gave it a nice bouquet. "All right, folks," Thorne said, rallying her crew. "We've got an alien fleet on the ropes. Let's finish what we started." "Got just the thing," Rigel said, his grin promising mischief. "An old classic from the archives. A real gem, one of those films that's more confusing than enlightening." "Perfect," Thorne replied. "Let's make these aliens question their decision to invade a planet with streaming services." The dreadnought systems sent the bizarre visual buffet into space, broadcasting it like a beacon of madness. The aliens, already reeling from the audio assault, now had to contend with incomprehensible human cinema. Perhaps it was the last straw, or perhaps the aliens had finally realized they'd bitten off more than they could chew from a galaxy full of lunatics. "Captain, they're falling back," Zephyra reported, disbelief threading her voice. "The ships are pulling out of formation. Guess they didn't appreciate our cultural enrichment program," Jenkins remarked, watching the alien retreat with a mix of relief and awe. "Culture shock," Hobbs said with a chuckle. "The universal language of what the hell is this?" "Let's not get too comfortable," Thorne cautioned, though her eyes shone with a fierce sort of hope. "We're not out of the woods yet." The alien ships continued their retreat, a disorganized withdrawal that suggested they'd finally realized the human mind was a battlefield they weren't equipped to handle. It was a strange sight, once mighty warships now slinking away like children who just learned the hard way not to touch the hot stove. "Captain, I think they're leaving," Rigel said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They're actually leaving. Keep an eye on them," Thorne replied, her gaze never leaving the viewscreen. This could be a trick, but the alien fleet continued its retreat, the lines of sleek ships fading into the blackness of space, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of human insanity. The crew let out a collective breath, the tension in the air evaporating like morning mist. They'd done it. Against every odd, they'd actually done it. "Well, damn," Jenkins said, breaking the silence. "We just scared off an alien armada with bad music and worse movies. Shows what they know," Hobbs added, shaking his head in amused disbelief. "Human culture is terrifying, not terrifying," Thorne interjected, smirking. "Just misunderstood." The crew burst into laughter, a sound that rang out across the bridge, rich with relief and triumph. It was a sound that spoke of survival, of hope reclaimed from the jaws of despair. "All right," Thorne said, reining in the celebration. "Let's not get complacent. Rigel, keep monitoring our systems. Zephyra, maintain communication with the fleet. I want regular updates." "Aye, Captain," they chorused, the camaraderie palpable. Thorne allowed herself a moment to savor the victory, though she knew better than to consider it complete. The universe was a fickle place, prone to throwing curveballs when you least expected it. But for now, they were still here, still fighting, still human. "Captain," Zephyra called, breaking Thorne's reverie. "Admiral Voss on the line again." "Patch it through," Thorne said, her tone all business, though the pride in her eyes couldn't be dimmed. "Thorne," Voss' voice crackled across the comm. "Quite the stunt you pulled." "Desperate times, Admiral," Thorne replied, a hint of humor in her voice. "Though I'd like to think of it as an inspired strategy." "No arguments here," Voss said, the grudging respect clear. "The fleet's stabilizing, no thanks to those alien simulations. Whatever you did, it worked." "Glad to hear it," Thorne said. "Though next time I'd prefer a strategy that doesn't involve giving the universe a headache." "Understood, Captain. I'll expect your report when the dust settles." Voss out. The comm went silent again, leaving the bridge in a rare moment of peace. Thorne looked around at her crew, her family, the people who had turned a hopeless situation into a bizarre victory. "We did it," Rigel said, his voice quiet with awe. "Yeah," Thorne replied, her smile bittersweet. "Though I'm not sure the universe will ever forgive us for that playlist." "Ah, to hell with the universe," Hobbs said, clapping his hands together. "It's about time it learned to appreciate our finer points." "Finer points?" Jenkins asked, raising an eyebrow. "Pretty sure we just broadcasted the audio equivalent of a dumpster fire." "But it worked," Zephyra pointed out, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "And who knows? Maybe we've just started a new trend in interstellar warfare." "Great. Just what we need," Thorne said, rolling her eyes. "I can see the headlines now. Earth defeats aliens with bad taste." The crew laughed again, and for a moment the madness of battle was forgotten. They'd faced the impossible and emerged victorious, a ragtag band of misfits who'd made the universe take notice. "All right, people," Thorne said, bringing them back to the present. "We've got a lot to do. This isn't over until we're sure the fleet is safe." The crew nodded, their expressions determined and ready for whatever came next. They'd learned that together, they could face anything, even if it sometimes meant throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at the problem. As the dreadnought sailed through the void, its battered systems holding firm, Thorne allowed herself a moment of reflection. They'd faced an enemy bent on breaking them, on turning them into shadows of themselves, but they'd fought back with every ounce of unpredictable humanity. Maybe there was a lesson in that, something about the power of creativity and madness in the face of adversity. Or maybe it was all just another chapter in the ongoing saga of a universe that never failed to surprise. But one thing was certain. Whatever else happened, Captain Thorne and her crew would meet it head-on, with a smirk and a middle finger to the cosmos. They were human, after all. And that, as the aliens had learned, was something to be reckoned with. The dreadnought hung in space like a prize fighter that had just gone 10 rounds with a grizzly. Its hull was battered, its systems groaning like someone with a vicious hangover, but against all odds it was still ticking. Captain Thorne stood on the bridge, surveying the aftermath of their triumph. She felt like she'd just run a marathon on a treadmill to nowhere, exhausted but oddly invigorated. Report, she barked, trying to sound more confident than she felt, because that's what captains did. They pretended they had all the answers. Reality was she was just as clueless as everyone else, but she'd gotten damn good at pretending. Rigel was the first to speak, though it was mostly a wheeze. Engines are. Well, they haven't exploded yet, so that's good news. On track to not die today, Thorn nodded. It was a low bar, but she'd take it. Zephyra, status on the fleet. Picking up the pieces, Zephyra replied, still hunched over her console. Ships are regrouping. Damage control teams are running around like caffeinated squirrels, and everyone's trying to figure out how not to make today's playlist a regular thing. Thank God for small mercies, Jenkins chimed in, leaning against a console with an air of practiced indifference. I don't think I could survive another round of the sound of monotony. Don't worry, Hobbs added, flashing a grin. We've got an entire universe of terrible human culture to unleash if we need it. Their laughter was a sound Thorn clung to, a reminder that despite everything they were still human, still capable of finding humor in the darkest of times. It was a talent, and maybe the only real weapon they had. Thorn, Admiral Voss's voice crackled through the comm again, the line scratchy but clear enough. Status update. Thorn straightened, though she doubted the Admiral cared much about posture. Fleet's regrouping, Admiral. Damage control is underway. We're holding it together. Good, Voss replied, his voice like gravel wrapped in sandpaper. We'll have time to assess the damage once we're out of the immediate danger zone. Understood, sir, Thorn said. And for what it's worth, I'm glad we're still here to have this conversation. Likewise, Captain. Voss out. Thorn sighed as the line went dead. Voss wasn't an easy man to please, but he was fair, and that was enough most days. She turned back to her crew, who were waiting for orders with expressions ranging from hopeful to how did we survive that. All right, Thorn said, rolling her shoulders as if she could physically shrug off the tension. First order of business, let's get this rust bucket stable. Rigel, I want a full diagnostic on the engines. Zephyra, keep our comms open with the fleet and patch through any priority messages. Rigel saluted lazily. On it, Captain. If the engines start making any funny noises, I'll let you know. I'll keep an ear out for anything urgent, Zephyra added, fingers still flying across her console like she was playing a particularly vindictive video game. What about us? Jenkins asked, gesturing between himself and Hobbs. Just sit pretty and look handsome. Thorn snorted. If you can manage that, I'll be impressed. But no, I need you two to help coordinate repairs with the rest of the fleet. We might have dodged the bullet, but we're not out of the line of fire yet. Got it, Hobbs said, pushing off his console. Time to play space mechanic. Ain't that a dream come true? Thorn watched them go, her heart lighter despite the chaos. They'd pulled off a miracle, and now it was time to make sure they didn't squander it. As the crew dispersed to their various tasks, Thorn found herself alone on the bridge, gazing out at the endless black of space. It was a void filled with potential and peril, a reminder of how small they really were. It was humbling in a terrifying sort of way. She tapped a button on her command chair, pulling up a status report on the view screen. The fleet was battered but intact, a ragtag collection of ships that had been through hell and still had the scorch marks to prove it. But they were alive, and that was more than she dared to hope for when this whole mess started. Captain, Zephyra's voice came through the comm, pulling Thorn from her thoughts. We've got a priority message from the flagship, a request for a meeting with fleet commanders. Patch it through to my quarters, Thorn replied, making her way off the bridge. I'll handle it there. Her quarters were a mess, but then they always were. She cleared a space on the cluttered desk and activated the comm unit, Voss's face appearing on the screen. Thorn, he greeted her with a nod. We're setting up a strategy session in an IOR. I need your input. Understood, Admiral, Thorn said, settling into her chair. I'll be there. Anything I should prep for, just bring your usual flair for the unexpected, Voss replied, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. It seems to work in our favor. Wouldn't call it flair, sir, more like a chronic inability to stick to the plan, Thorn quipped back, earning a chuckle from the Admiral. Either way, I'm expecting good things. Voss out. The screen went dark and Thorn leaned back in her chair, contemplating the implications of the meeting. They were rallying, planning their next move. It was a good sign, she told herself, even if the path ahead was still murky. Captain? Rigel's voice came through the intercom, sounding unusually upbeat. Engines are stable for now. We're running hotter than a summer barbecue, but no imminent explosions. Thanks, Rigel, Thorn said, relaxing just a fraction. Keep me updated if anything changes. Will do, Captain. And if you need a new playlist for the next battle, I've got some ideas. God help us all, Thorn muttered, cutting the connection. She stood, stretching out the kinks in her back, and decided it was time for some morale boosting. She found the crew in the mess hall, gathered around a table that had seen better days. The place smelled like old socks and burnt coffee, but it was home, and right now it was buzzing with life. Hey, Captain, Jenkins waved her over, grinning like he'd just found the last chocolate bar in the universe. Join us. We're celebrating. Thorn raised an eyebrow. Celebrating what? Not being dead, Hobbs chimed in, holding up a mug of something that might have once been coffee. To improbable survival and the Dreadnought's utter refusal to die. Cheers to that, Thorn said, grabbing a mug and raising it with a wry smile. And to whatever crazy plan we come up with next. They clinked mugs, the sound echoing in the room like a promise. A promise to keep fighting, to keep laughing in the face of doom, and to never let the universe grind them down. For a moment, Thorn let herself savor the camaraderie, the warmth of her crew, the knowledge that they were all in this together. It was a rare gift, one she intended to protect with everything she had. All right, enough with the mushy stuff, Zephyra said, rolling her eyes. Let's talk about the real issue here. When are we getting better coffee? Because this stuff tastes like regret. I'm working on it, Rigel replied, smirking. But until then, consider it part of your training. Builds character, or stomach ulcers. Jenkins retorted, grimacing as he took another sip. Same difference, Hobbs said, shrugging. At least we have coffee. Could be worse, could be dead, Thorn pointed out, setting her mug down with a solid thunk. So let's focus on staying alive, yeah. The crew nodded, their laughter and banter filling the air like a bomb. It was moments like these that reminded her why she'd ever wanted to be a captain. Not for the power, the authority, or the endless paperwork, but for the chance to lead people like this. People who could find hope in the darkest of places. Captain, Zephyra said, glancing at her datapad. We've got incoming messages from the fleet. Everyone's eager to regroup and figure out our next steps. Thorn nodded, the weight of responsibility settling back onto her shoulders. It was a familiar weight, one she carried gladly, but it was always heavier than she expected. All right, team, Thorn said, standing. We've got work to do. Let's make sure the universe knows we're not done yet. As they dispersed, Thorn felt a renewed sense of purpose. They'd survived the impossible, and now it was time to plan for the future. A future where humanity wasn't just fighting to survive, but thriving, exploring, and maybe even finding a place among the stars. It was a big dream, but she'd seen firsthand what humans were capable of. And if anyone dared to stand in their way, well, she had a few more tricks up her sleeve. As the Dreadnought sailed through the void, its crew working tirelessly to repair, regroup, and ready themselves for whatever came next, Thorn allowed herself a moment to dream. Of new worlds, new challenges, and new beginnings. Because if there was one thing she'd learned, it was that humanity had a knack for turning the impossible into the inevitable. And she was damn proud to be part of it.